wherever you are joining us. I am going to be the moderator for this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are joining. Once again, my name is Elizabeth Johnson, and I work with the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora. It's a privilege to be moderating these two amazing writers. In the course of the conversation and reading, if you have questions, we will make time for that, but you can also leave them in the comment section and we can take them. This would be an engagement between our two lovely writers where we would have readings, question and answers, and also, take your comments and when necessary. So I'd like to introduce our writers, and first I'll introduce Ayesha, who is by proximity a bit closer to me. She is in Senegal, and Ayesha Harruna Attah is the author of several books, but today we'll be focusing on The Deep Blue Between, which is written for young adults. And it's a continuation of a previous book, The 100 Wells of Salaga, or it takes from two of the main characters and develops their story here. And then we have Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond, who will be reading from her latest book for children, Blue, such a beautifully illustrated and written book. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome, Ayesha and Nana, to today's event.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I'd like to start with you, Nana, since of the two, yours is like the latest. How does it feel to have your book out? How has it been doing, and what has been the response so far?
It has been incredibly exciting to write for children, and just to kind of hear their unfiltered reviews, their unfiltered thoughts on it. It's been really fun. I think some of you, if you could all just keep yourselves
mute.
Yeah, it's just been really fun. I did a story time with kids in person last Saturday, and just so wonderful. One boy told me as he was reading the book that he was so excited that lapis lazuli, which I write about in the book, is in Minecraft, the video game. And so he was like, oh my goodness, yes. And he was able to make the connection. He was like, yes, and it's so rare, to get it in the game. And I was so happy about that. And I did a classroom visit, and one student told me, asked me if I had considered writing a book on the color purple, because purple was also the color of royalty in antiquity. And she had done her research, and she wanted me to be aware of this research. And I just loved her. I was like, you are the reason I wrote this book. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear it. And I enjoyed reading it. So I can imagine that for children, it will be such an immersive experience with the best of colors in the book. And then the way you are able to just nicely present history in a very exciting way. So congratulations once again. And Ayesha, your book, The Deep Blue Between, this is, if I'm correct, this is your first book for young adults.
Yes, it is. And very quickly, Nana, congratulations. And I think the student you met was absolutely right. You should have a series with all the colors, all of them. So yes, Elizabeth, this is my first book for young adults. And I guess I met an editor who edits children's books. And then she asked me if I'd written for young adults. And that's how this was born. But the characters in my mind they had to have their book written. I didn't know what form it would take. Then when I met the editor, this became the genre of the book. Yeah.
And how has the response been so far with the book? Especially because all the other books you've written are not for young adults, and then suddenly we have this one. So what has been the response and the excitement around it?
It's been great. It came out in October 2020 in the UK, and then it just was released in North America around the same time as Nana's book, like maybe a month, 2 weeks later. And the response has just been really wonderful. I've had feedback from young readers online, because I haven't really been able to go to that many places to promote the book. But it also won an award called the Great Reads Award. It didn't win, so it was nominated for the award, and it was selected by students and school librarians. So that was really, really exciting to know that it had touched the hearts of young readers and the people who love to push books for them and look for books for them as well. And then it's been translated into a number of languages. And one of the most exciting for me is Portuguese, because part of this, Brazilian Portuguese to be specific, part of this book takes place in Brazil. So to have it go there feels like coming full circle, and the feedback there has been really, really wonderful from what I can, Google Translate. Yeah.
Yeah, really am glad to hear, and congratulations on this. Both books are very blue and actually have the word blue in them. I don't know if the two of you had a conversation about this, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on, the title and how significant the color blue is to you. And we'll start with you, Ayesha.
So mine came about because I was just thinking about what separated the girls, and it was this immense ocean. So, and I knew like they had dreams, and in their dreams there was water. So there was a lot of blue in just the way the girls interacted with each other. And the sea, when I think of the sea, there's just a profundity to it. It's really, really this body that mystifies and intrigues and scares and frightens some people like me. So it just seemed like an apt title. And then the word between also was perfect because they are twins, and even though they're apart, they're connected. So for me, like each of these words was there for a reason, and blue is actually my favorite color. So it worked out nicely.
Great
Yes.
to hear. Nana Ekua, I am particularly interested to hear why you picked the color blue to write about, and mainly because as a Ghanaian myself, when I think about colors that have a lot of significance to culture and history, blue is not necessarily one of them. So we have red, we have black, we have gold, blue doesn't come to mind. So I was particularly interested to know, why you decided to write on blue and name the book Blue.
That's a great question. Children's books were not on my radar, and I was actually just reading about King Solomon's temple furnishings in the Bible. And one thing that stood out to me was that the curtains in the temple were blue, or one of the curtains in the temple were blue. And I just thought, why was this a detail that was important? So I literally just kind of Googled, like, okay. And I stumbled upon this really fascinating fact that in antiquity, there was a snail, the Murex trunculus snail, that produced a secretion that when it oxidized in the sun, it turned blue. And this it led me down a rabbit hole of research, but basically the snail only produced a drop of blue. And so only the wealthy could afford, obviously, to dye a whole temple veil, etc. And so that really just fascinated me. And so I just started doing more research about the color, and just learning about lapis lazuli and how that was also in antiquity a rare find, a big discovery, because ultimately what you were touching upon, Ayesha, like the sky and the sea have always sort of captured humanity's imagination, because it's all around us, but we can't really like grasp it. We can't hold on to it. And when painters and ancient dyers were trying to recreate the color, they couldn't find ways to recreate it in a way that was lasting. So blue just became even more of this mysterious color. So to me, as I was just finding out all of these fascinating facts, I said to myself, I wish I'd known this as a kid. And I feel like kids who, have their crayons and their coloring books, if they had access to this information, it would just heighten their wonder, the wonder that they already have,
Thank you so much for that. And I enjoy the way you highlight the color blue. It made me think about it in ways I didn't ever imagine, and also learn about a few things. I didn't know that it was really difficult to make the color blue. And so it really brought to mind all these things. And my earlier points in my question about the significance of the color to at least West African history, I really didn't know how significant it was into cloth making. And so you really highlighted that for me. So thank you so much. I think it's now a good time to go into our first set of readings. So we'd like to start with you, Nana Ekua.
Sure. Okay, I'll just start from the beginning. I'll just read a couple of pages. So this is blue. So the color blue is all around us. Have you ever wondered where it comes from? It's in the sky, but you can't touch it. It's in the sea, but when you cup it, it disappears. You can crush iris petals for a brilliant shade, but just add water and away it fades. But then blue appears in the strangest places, discovered throughout history in unexpected ways. As early as 4500 BC, diggers found blue rocks called lapis lazuli in mines deep below Afghanistan's Sarai-Sung Valley. Ancient Egyptians used the rocks mostly to make jewelry. Some wore them as charms, believing they had the power to protect people from evil. But with time, they found new ways to use this underground find. By 44 BC, many Egyptians, including Queen Cleopatra VII, were applying a bluish mixture around their eyes that looked like eyeshadow, made with ground lapis lazuli grains, plants, and animal fat. More than 600 years later, artists began painting sculptures, walls, and canvases with blue from the crushed rocks too. It was a royal pain for those who made the paint, and so expensive only the wealthy could buy it. Since it was a luxury and in such high demand, for centuries, scientists, merchants, and dyers looked for more sources of blue. Then, on the shores of the Mediterranean, Central America, Mexico, and Japan, dyers found blue in the belly of certain shellfish. A Phoenician myth says a dog discovered the color. Finding a snail on the beach, the pup ate it up. The snail turned the dog's tongue purple-blue, and from that moment, a new industry was born. Dyers had different ways of releasing the color. In Mexico, they pressed the snail's foot. In the Middle East, they cracked its shell. Then they waited for the blue to appear. Depending on the snail, the color starts out a milky white or brownish yellow, but once it's in the air and the sun, it quickly turns green, then reddish purple, and with more sunlight, blue. But whether dyers pressed or cracked snail blue was hard to produce. Each snail released just 1 or 2 drops. Imagine how many snails and drops it took to dye a royal robe, not to mention enough fabric to fill a merchant's shop. Perhaps because blue was the color of the heavens, yet so rare and hard to create on earth, people around the world considered the color holy. In an old Liberian folktale, blue is explained as a gift that connects God to humans. In Italy, from the 13th century onward, some artists began reserving blue to paint the robes of Mary, the mother of Jesus. In Indonesia, some say special prayers to ward off evil spirits before they make the dye. In Israel, blue drapes hung in the temple King Solomon built, and many Jews still wear blue dyed threads called tchelet. For years, snail blue was the most popular color, but all along there was another way to find blue in nature. In parts of Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas, a group of plants in the pea family grew. They were called indigofera. There were a few different ways to get blue from these plants. Green leaves. Indian dyers soaked them in water, while West African dyers crushed and dried them. When they added ashes or urine, it enabled the dye to dissolve in water so it could bind to fabric. Since it was cheaper for dyers to produce blue from the indigo plant than from rocks and snails, and the shade was just as vibrant and long-lasting, indigo dye, especially indigo from India and West Africa, was eventually valued by most lovers of the color as the best of the blues. India and Nigeria became powerful centers for making and trading indigo. People made clothing, makeup, and medicine with it. Indigo became so precious, people spent it like money. And I'll end there. There's more to the story. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that first reading. I have a few questions, but then we would first take Aisha's reading and then we can go back into question and answer time. And if you are just joining us, this is a conversation and reading between Ayesha Harruna Attah and Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond, both who have two amazing books. First, I'll mention Blue by Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond, which is new and for children. And I'll also mention The Deep Blue Between by Ayesha Harruna Attah, targeted for young adults. But of course, as adults, we can also read. That's the joy that reading brings. So take your reading, Ayesha.
Okay, so I'll also just start from the beginning, and I'll quickly say that the book is narrated in two parts. There's a first person narration by one twin, and then a third person narration by the other twin. And the first chapter falls somewhere in between. So I'll just read a bit from the first chapter and then from Hassana's chapter. In our dreams, our father sits in a room where color doesn't live. Our mother suckles her baby, but both their limbs are frozen as if forgotten by time. Fire burns up our village. Smoke chokes our throats. Flames sear our skin. We run. Our hands clasp each other's with the hold of glue. Her fingers are my fingers are hers. Ours is a grip that started in the womb before our first separation. We have lost home before, but that didn't break us. Now we're losing home again, but we still have each other. We run, chased by hooves and cries and winged men. One of us trips. Sweat lubricates the thin film between our hands. Her fingers slide down mine. We were wrong. This time it feels final. She slips away from me. Hassana. I could start with how my baba went to sell shoes in Jene and never came back, or how our village was crisped to the ground, and how I don't know if my mother or grandmother's whereabouts, or how my big sister Amina and I lost our brother in a human caravan. Or I could tell you about the worst day of my life, when my twin sister was snatched from me. But I'll start with the moment when I stopped letting other people control what I did or where I went or what happened to me. I will start with the moment when I broke free. In 1892, when I was 10, I was forced to live on a land where trees grew so close together, they sucked out my voice. Wafa Sapon, a man as tall as me, had bought Amina and me and brought us to his home in a clearing surrounded by trees that scraped the sky. Every time I looked up, I wondered how the trees stayed up so tall and didn't topple over. And every day, the forest squeezed my chest flat like an empty cowskin gourd. Many nights, I would wake up sweating, heart racing, and always breathless. I was a child of the savannah, of open spaces and short trees. From the horizon, we could see the camels of the caravan arriving. The world seemed vast and limitless. The forest shrunk the world and my whole life with it. There isn't one thing I can say I liked about Wafa Sapon and his family. Maybe only that Amina was still there with me. She fared slightly better than me and said Wafa Sapon's food was quite tasty, that their tuwo, which they called fufu, was sweeter than ours. She made sure I sipped their soups with fish and mushrooms, but I could have been eating the bark of a tree. It all felt heavy against my tongue. It all had no flavor. I ate because Amina told me to, but I was half a person. The change in my story began at the height of cola season. Wafa Sapon had made us climb up more cola trees than I could count, as always. We little ones, his children, and the ones he'd bought, scrambled up like lizards in search of spots far away from each other to better harvest as many of the pods as we could. Wafa Sapon said cola was God's gift, and God would be angry if we didn't take all that he'd given us. I was angry at Otieno, my God, for sending me to a place like this when I had done nothing wrong. Sometimes I wondered what Wafa Sapon's God was like. He seemed to be blessing Wafa Sapon with an abundance of cola nuts. I will never forget having to stretch out my arms to cut the pods of cola at their bases, while precariously balancing my feet on branches, each time thinking I would fall. I never did fall and managed to still my fear enough to keep grabbing the pods, which I threw down to Amina and the other older ones, who put them into big baskets they would later carry. And then I'll skip ahead a little bit and just end with a little dream that she has after being in this place for a while. All around us is water reflecting a blue that is deeper than the sky. There are people around us looking at the water, which behind us stretches past the edges of the earth. There are cloths blowing like big white scarves in the wind, and we are standing on a wooden platform. Ahead of us is land that looks familiar and unfamiliar all at once, with palm-like trees that shake and bend in the wind. The trees grow bigger and bigger. We are moving. I woke up, my clothes wet, as if a bucket of water had been flung on me. The forest had not only taken my voice, it had also seeped into my dreams, severing the strongest connection I shared with my sister. I shook my big sister awake and told her about the dream. These are her dreams, I said. Husseina is alive. And I'll stop here. You can...
Thank you. Thank you for that first set of reading. And before I start asking my questions, I'd just like to mention again, because a few people joined while you were reading, that we have done a few question and answer, and we just took the first set of readings from our guests. And so if you missed out, Aisha read from The Deep Blue Between, and Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond read from her book Blue. So my question goes to both of you, but I'd like to start first with Nana Ekua. When writing for children, especially when writing text that has, historical grounding, I know that in the research of it, there's so much that you would find out, and there's so much that you would want to let the kids know. How do you balance, putting out enough information and keeping the story still exciting and engaging for the kids to want to continue?
Thank you for that question. I would say that it was just partly sticking to what drew my sense of wonder, and also my editor. I was really excited about all of the information that I found out, and I feel like my editor helped me to just kind of rein certain things in. But yeah, I was really focused on the things that gave me, that fascinated me and gave me a sense of wonder. I wanted to transmit that to the kids.
Thank you. And you, Aisha, writing a book for young adults that has a lot of historical grounding, how do you balance between, putting out enough information and also making the story exciting for the reader to want to turn every page till the end?
Yes, like Nana said, it is a big, dance you play, and there's a delicate balance, because there's so much you stumble upon as you're doing research. Like with mine, I was in 19th century West Africa and 19th century Brazil, and there's just so many details. You want to add in as many descriptions as you can, but then you also want to tell a good story. You want to keep the reader, whether it's a young adult reader or an adult reader, you just want to keep people's focus. And description, while it's great at creating a world and bringing alive, like whatever people can see, touch, experience, too much of it bogs down the reader. So I definitely had to, have a nice balance between what I wanted to show of this place, what I wanted the characters to feel, and that story of the twins searching for themselves. So one way I've heard it described is almost like a tapestry, where you have a bit of this and a bit of that, and then it's like you're weaving things. So sometimes you go down, sometimes you come up, sometimes it's cross stitches, just to create a full picture. So I enjoy it a lot. Another person has likened writing to carpentry. So chipping away and molding and shaping, depending on how you work. You might have a master plan or you might not, and then the story unfolds from there. So yeah.
I'm really happy you talk about the ups and downs, because I was actually going to say as a comment that one thing that I enjoyed about the Deep Blue Between is how everything about the book in one way or the other reflects the movement of water. And water, you know, it just brings our mind to the color blue. The significance of the color is more symbolic than is actually realized, at least for me as a reader. It's a movement, and then there's memory that is also, you know, steeped within this movement and this color that connects the sisters. So I'm really happy that you spoke about that briefly.
Yeah.
My next question still relates to, you know, writing for a different age group. And I want to know now, I'll start with you, Aisha. What were the, I mean, I don't know if challenges is a good word, but what were the activities or steps you had to take channeling your writing from, you know, a more adult audience into a young adult audience?
I think in my case, I didn't censor myself. I didn't change the way I worked. If anything, writing this book allowed me to hone in on something that had started a little bit in the 100 Wells of Salaga for me, because I have written books since I was 23, or published books since I was 23. So I feel like I've had a very public growing up in my writing. So in the beginning, I worked as a mentor, and then I did an MFA. And then by the 100 Wells of Salaga, I began to develop my own sort of style and sensibility. But in the Deep Blue Between, I just leaned into what I keep calling now magic. And it was just letting the characters guide me, really tuning into what was happening around me and letting that shape the book. So in doing that, it's sort of like the way Nana said, she followed her wonder. I did the same thing. I just let the girls tell their stories. And I guess by virtue of their being young when the book started, it just lends itself to that young adult's voice. But I didn't have in my head that this should be a book for young adults. So I didn't say, oh, you should be sensitive about this or that or X, Y, and Z thing. I guess in editing, I would come back and think, okay, is this the right way? But as I was writing, I just let the story unfold. And then the one big thing I had in my mind, which is a message the editor passed on to me, was a sense of hope that you should leave the reader with. Because I think a lot of adult books, you can leave you with this bleakness that I guess you don't want to give to a young adult audience. There was another thought I had, but it slipped out, so I will stop here.
Yeah, I'll pass the question on to Nana. I know you've spoken about it, but just to go more into detail, how was it to remove yourself from writing from an older audience to writing for a very young audience? Because as compared to Aisha's, hers is more of a movement from adults to young adults, but you take like a deeper climb down from adults to children. So I really would like to know, you know, how it was that you prepared yourself mentally to write for the selected age group.
I would have to say I honestly didn't view it as like a sort of a dumbing down or like a stepping down. I really, the book started out as like a poem, you know, so I just kind of thought about myself as a child. And I think that most people who have interacted with young people know that they can really absorb concepts that we think are above their heads. They can absorb those things. And so I didn't think of it in that way. I just said, you know what, I'm just gonna, I started out with this poem, and I actually heard from, I went to an event, and the writer Jacqueline Woodson, who writes a lot for children as well, had said, think of it as, you know, in terms of the way the words are, because a children's book, the maximum word count should be about 1,000 words. So think about it in terms of how the words are laid out on the page, because that's what you want the children to absorb, or the reader to absorb per page. So that was something that I thought about in terms of when I started to think about like, okay, this thing that started out as a poem that I have to sort of format into a children's book. Think about it sort of line by line. What do I want to communicate, and making sure that every line, every word held enough that it could stand on its own on a page. So I thought about that a lot. And in terms of the history, again, one of the things that struck me is that when we read about history, it's often from a Western perspective, or it's from the perspective of whatever, the very sort of narrow perspective of the country that you come from or the culture you come from. And one of the things that I loved as I was just doing all of this research is that, like, one, the sky is over the whole world. So everybody engages with it and has an idea and feeling about it. And so I really wanted to engage, like, what was it like in other countries? It's not just, because when you start doing the research, it's sort of like you only come across like, European kind of thought on it. So I was really excited to reread a really good book that I would recommend to just anybody who is sort of like wants to nerd out like I did. Catherine McKinley's book, Indigo, as well as Baruch Sturman's The Rarest Blue, because it really gives you a sense of, all the different kind of cultures that were involved. And also another book called Color, The History of the Natural Palette. These are obviously books for adults, but yeah, Sylvia, Indigo is a wonderful book. But yeah, I think that was really important to me too, to just make sure that kids could see themselves in this story. And I have to tell you, one of the things, my first classroom visit, one student got so excited when I mentioned Afghanistan. He was like, because it's like, he sees, he can see like I come from that country, and it's, it's not about the war, or it's not about like the negativity. It's like actually something amazing, came from this place. And I think that was the feeling of a lot of students. So that's what I was thinking. And I was also, just to keep speaking, I was thinking about myself as a child. I really liked learning I just loved learning, and I loved learning facts. And it made me feel smart to like know these things. And so I was like, just load it up, and like what they can't absorb right now, maybe they'll grow into it.
Yeah, I just quickly want to jump in and say same thing. That was the thought that was sliding through my mind, that, at age 13, I was already reading like Alice Walker and Toni Morrison, which are difficult books, but I really loved that I was reading writers who looked like me. And even though some things were way above my, grasping level, I still loved seeing people who looked like me. So as I said, to write a book for a younger audience, I thought 13-year-old me could read difficult topics, so there's no need to dumb things down. So I just wrote it as I would any other book. Yeah.
Thank you.
I will quickly add, sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but I just want to add that one thing that I did do is that when I had finished writing it, there were certain words, and I can't remember which words, but some of them were just a higher vocabulary level. So what I did do is I consulted a second and third grade vocabulary list. And I went back in certain instances and changed a certain word that, might be not familiar to them, just so that, they could, it could be a little bit more accessible. So that was something that I did.
Thank you for, I like I feel the passion of the writing when you both talk about the writing process. Aisha, it's almost like Aisha is in my mind, because whenever I want to say something, she kind of touches on it. But before I ask my next question, I want to open up for questions from our audience who have been enjoying the conversation and reading so far. If you have a question or comment you'd like to put, we are opening up the platform for you. You could either leave it in the chat or raise your hand to be allowed to ask a question. So there's a question here. Okay, this is from Sylvia, similar to what I asked, but different. What do you do psychologically and behaviorally to prepare yourself to write for children? Example, do you hang around with a lot more children? Do you read more kids' books? Do you go back to your own childhood memories? So that's a question.
I guess I can jump in. I'm so lucky I have a 5-year-old. So I'm also at work on a smaller book for children. I don't know when I'm going to finish it, but he's been my first reader, and I'm like, do you like this, Emil? Does this make sense? Do you like the colors? And he says he loves everything, but one day he'll be like, Mommy, this is not good. Because as he grows older, he gets more and more opinionated. But also, I think as I write, I think of myself as a method actor. So most of the time, I'm really in the skin of my characters. So if I'm writing Hassana's story, I'm in Hassana's body and I'm feeling things the way she is. So everything is hers. And then when I'm in her sister's body, she's the quieter twin. The feeling is completely different as well. So I inhabit these characters, or more like they inhabit me. So there is, an absorption of who they are, what their desires are, and then you translate whatever it is they're going through onto the page. So that's how it works for me.
I think I think of adults as just filtered, jaded children. I think that, children just don't have the, I guess, the life experiences or the, they haven't lost hope and optimism yet, which we hope they never will. And they haven't lost their sense of wonder. So I don't know that I did something sort of psychologically or behaviorally to prepare to write the book. I just held on to the wonder. And I know I said that before, but that was really when I became so fascinated by the facts that I was coming across, I said, you know what, and it touched on my wonder, and it helped me to see the world differently. It helped me to see the color blue differently, but all colors, the sky, it helped me to relate to the world in a new and different way. And I thought to myself, kids are there, but they just maybe don't have these facts at their fingertips. And us as adults don't necessarily have these facts at our fingertips. So it was just exciting for me to just envision a child sort of growing up with this information, and how would it sort of keep their wonder alive, So that was really what I did. And again, I thought back to myself as a kid. I was just a nerdy child who loved writing. I loved reading. I loved absorbing facts that were sometimes over my head. So I was really writing for that child, for me,
Yeah. So it's interesting. It takes me back to when I was young, and my dad would buy these 500 fantastic facts, and these books that have all these bits of information, and those are my favorite picks. So when both of you talk about how you've read books that were a bit advanced than you, but it was still exciting, just took my memory to those times where I want to. There are books that he would buy for my age, but then I really just want to read 500 fantastic facts and know what happened in China and in Germany, even though I don't understand it. So I can really relate to that. There's another question here from B. Carrington. I hope I got the name right. But the question is, what advice do you have for first-time writers, and how do you stay focused on your projects when you have so much going on? I think that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really a challenge for me to stay focused because part of my writing life is I also freelance for money, just freelance and work for different clients. So at any given time, I have, my different personal creative projects that I'm working on, plus work that I'm doing to pay the bills. And so something that I'm learning or have learned, and I'm continuing to learn, is one thing at a time. Because when I start to look, when I sort of like take a step back and see all the different pieces that I have due or that I have to do, I get overwhelmed and I shut down. But when I just say like, okay, today is today, and I have to do, you know, I have to work on this, and I have to work on this, and I have to work on that, then I'm able to do that and just do it one thing at a time. And I would just say for first-time writers, like, I think that, you know, yes, writing is hard. Yes, you know, it's a long journey, and all of these things, but I think don't let that intimidate you. Like, just write, because it's also simple. Like, it's also just doing it. You know what I mean? So I guess maybe it goes back to like, instead of like worrying about like, okay, who's going to read this? Will it ever get sold or published? Just start by like putting the words on the page, writing the work. Because like I said, with this children's book, it started out as I came across this information and I wrote a poem for myself in bed. And I just thought, like, I'm still so interested in it. I want more. And it led me on a journey. But I would just say, like, don't discount what you're doing right now. Just keep writing.
That was good advice for even me. No, I think Nana is totally right. I would add that give yourself a lot of grace and be patient with yourself. It can be a tough field, but if you're kind with yourself, it's the first step. And one technique I've learned is to write a bad first draft. I use the word bad. It comes from the writer Anne Lamott. She uses a different word, but there might be children in the audience. I won't use the word she uses, but a rough first draft, more like. And it's a draft where you don't have to show anybody anything. It's a draft where you can paint broad strokes. You can splatter paint everywhere. You can play. And I really love that, because that's where some of the magic is created, because then you start connecting things in different ways. And you begin to see where things can connect and link up. And then you rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, which can be very painful. But then when you get to a certain point in that rewriting as well, it's almost like the runner's high, which I have never experienced, but some people tell me it's an amazing thing. Because you've done it so many times, you reach this point where your brain is like, oh, okay, this can go there. And then it's almost like, yeah, beautiful mind where the connections are just zipping together, and then you rewrite and rewrite, and then there'll be times when it's difficult again. But it feels a lot like that as a writer, and I'm going through edits right now. It's terribly painful, but I just got to the end of the book and I just felt that rush of like, we've done it. It's not a perfect draft, but we've written a full second draft that is going somewhere. So give yourself grace. Try writing a rough first draft. And the last thing I'll say is, I think just if you can find a writer's community, that is also helpful, because if you have people reading your work, then you know, okay, I'm doing something. It's I can get feedback. Maybe I need more work here, or maybe this person in my community can connect me to someone who knows literary magazines or agents or publishers. So having a community is very helpful.
Thank you. I see another question, but I would like us to go into the next set of readings, and then we can come and answer the questions. So you can still leave your questions in the comment section, but I would like to take the second set of readings now. This time we'd like to start with Aisha.
Okay, so I'm going to read from the second twin section, also just from her beginning. The morning was humid, and Huseina's thin wrapper clung to her body as she sat in front of Baba Kaseko's house, watching a parade of women decked in frilly white blouses and thick full skirts dance and sing. A shy sun peeked over the houses of Bamboshi Street, as if just biding its time before unleashing its heat on the attendants of the procession. Huseina clapped despite herself. The music seeped into her bones. It was so beautiful. It reminded her of the caravans that arrived in her village, except this one contained only people dressed in shiny clothes and no animals. Also, these people weren't just passing through. They were here to be seen. They swayed left and right, pushing into a crowd that swelled further up the streets they climbed. People had come out of their homes just as she had, and those with Ile Peteshi two-story houses leaned out of their upstairs windows to wave at the procession. The colors of the skirts were splendid. Bright silvers and gold, pinks and blues, a rainbow burst. Behind them, drummers rapped at the skins of their drums, producing the deepest music she'd ever heard. They seemed to be heading towards Campus Square, a place she passed by on her way to Agaru Market. Husseina wished she could follow the procession, but didn't want to get into trouble with Baba Kaseko. So she just sat and watched what she would do, what she would give to be able to dance like the girls, to be dressed in such colors, to be free. Drums pound, hollow out, boom again and call to her. The beat grows to a steady thrumming and fills her head. All her thoughts are one with the music of the drums, as if the drums are a voice calling out, come. Carried by the voice that is at once in her and about her, she floats to the drum song as if on air. The music controls her limbs. She seems to be the only person around the drums. Her body absorbs the heat of the music, spinning as its volume increases and slowing down when the beat changes pace. Her body spins, and she feels at last free. Free of the fear that has always followed her, fear that has chosen her, fear that often clips her tongue and leaves her struggling to find the right words, that often leaves her in tears, fear that is so suffocating that even now, as she rises above it, she can't completely rid herself of it. The music makes her fear keep its distance, but she isn't able to will it away for good. She's only keeping it at bay. This fear has been her constant companion, but for the first time, she feels a small tear between herself and this thing that has ruled all the years she's known. She wants to leap up to the skies, finally armed with a way of ridding herself of it, even if only temporarily. The beat slows and she spins slower. Her chest grows its own raspy music. She breathes heavily and falls. I'll stop here.
Thank you for that. And now we would like to take a reading from Nana Ekua.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to the end, sort of the end. Okay, so because of its scarcity, mystery, and holy associations, blue was more than a color. It was a feeling. We feel blue when we're sad, perhaps because the people who had to dig, grind, and grow passed down their painful memories of working the mines or of slavery on indigo plantations. Africans enslaved in America sang prayers that sounded like tears. The songs were called spirituals, and they inspired a style of music called the blues, originally known for its aching words and melodies. We feel excited when something happens out of the blue, perhaps because the color was once so rare, a discovery that seemed to appear out of thin air. And blue is still considered extraordinary, as it was once the color of royalty. This could be why around the world, blue ribbons are pinned for first prize. Today, dyers still use indigo to make blankets and clothing, and some doctors still use it as a natural medicine. Maybe because blue has such a complicated history of pain, wealth, invention, and recovery, it's become a symbol of possibility, as vast and deep as the bluest sea, and as wide open and high as the bluest sky. No, that's it.
Thank you so much. And that was our second reading from both books, The Deep Blue Between and Blue. We have a question here, but before I get into that, let me ask this question to both of you. Now that you have written for young adults and children, what are your general thoughts on, the industry of the genre that you're writing in now, specifically to African audience? So maybe I'll contextualize it and say to a Ghanaian audience, since we are all Ghanaian here, at least the authors. do you think that there's a need for more children's books or young adults books that go in line with, teaching something significant, whether culture, be it the significance of a color, history, and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we will be enriching by having as many books on as many themes as possible. And I think we're only beginning to scratch the surface of what can be written. Like West African history is, oh my goodness, it's like when I think about it, I get so excited and I wish I had more time in the day. Imagine like all the stories, like the young women like Yanega from Burkina Faso. Like this is one place. You can come to Senegal and there are all these heroes and heroines here as well. Nigeria, Queen Amina. There's so many stories that haven't been told or that have been told but haven't come down to us because we've lost them along the way. But if we can go and dig them out and get them back, they're stories that can be projected into the future. There's the nonfiction stories, there are fictional stories. There's just so much that is out there that we haven't even begun to write about. And for me, I think if we can teach these books in schools, that's when I know we'd have made it. It's like when the GES comes and asks for like this book or even the 100 Wells of Salaga, then I'll know we're getting somewhere in life. Or like Blue, elementary school children, that would be the dream. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely concur. So any school librarians, any Ghana Education Service representatives on this, yes, please. I think one of the things that yes, I agree with everything Ayesha said, and I think it's really important for us as Africans to be reading each other, like to be reading not only other Ghanaians, but other people across the continent, because I think we don't really know what's happening. We're getting things from the news or whatever, but just really connecting, like what is it like to grow up in Nigeria? What is it like to grow up in Senegal? What is it like to grow up in other countries? And then in the diaspora, because those are our brothers and sisters too. So I think that having those, having those be part of the curricula is really important. And I remember I went to Infantiman Girls, and I remember reading, like we read Mine Boy, which was set in South Africa, and we read Amata Edu. And just we read different works by different African authors. And that was formative for me because, having come from the States, I hadn't been exposed to those writers. So I think, definitely at the school level, it's really important that our education, people who are in that role can advocate for us in that way.
Thank you. Very well said, both of you. And I really agree. I would definitely love to see more children's books in Ghana, not just by Ghanaian authors, but then from people across the continent. I think that it just makes the process of wanting kids to read more easier. When they see so many exciting books to pick from, they will just be scrambling for it themselves and wouldn't have to struggle with getting them to read, especially in the times where technology is now entering its metaverse, and it's just getting more immersive. So thank you for those statements. And I'll just take a few comments before we go into the question from Gabriel. So Natasha Gaspard is saying this I think she's commenting on what both of you just said. So this way we can realize the similarities, not focus on difference so much. Sylvia agrees and says we absolutely need those stories. Natasha again says we need it. Afrofuturism is one of the genres that she mentions. AC Brew-Hammond says I'm proud of the two of you. You've both come a long way. D. Carrington is thanking you both for their advice on writing. So now I think we can go into the question from Gabriel, and he is asking, I have a project of crafting a children's novella about war and arms. On the other hand, I've been ruminating over the guilt. Is it okay to expose young ones to blood and arms? That's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. And I think it is also a reality of our world that sadly there is war and there are repercussions. So even if you're not in a place where things are happening, like right now, there are, ripple effects, and even little ones will feel them. So I, as a parent, try to talk about what's going on and talk at the level of my child so he understands, so this is what's going on with big issues, small issues, with things going on in the family. And I found with some of the bigger things going on in my life, having a book about whatever it is so useful, because I can take the book to my child and say, look, there are other people who have experienced this. Let's see how they've dealt with it. And for the child, it shows them they're not alone, that there are other people. So whatever it is that you want to write about, there'll be somebody out there who's going to say, thank you for writing about it. So I think don't feel guilty. There will be somebody, even if it's one person, you'd have done your job, who will thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would just say that especially today, there is so much that children are being exposed to. We're living in a pandemic. War is on the front page of the newspaper daily. They see these things, and we don't do them a service by shielding kids from these things. I think rather, as Ayesha was just saying, it opens, writing a novella about war and arms opens up the opportunity for adults and children to have a flowing conversation about these things. Because sometimes too, adults are also afraid and also inarticulate and don't know really how to process these things. So the book becomes a sort of meeting place where both parent and child, teacher and child, adult and child can connect and answer and ask questions and answer questions and start a conversation.
Thank you for that. I'll just like to quickly add that I agree with what both Aisha and Nana have said. I do not think that there's a topic that kids are not exposed to, especially now that we live in a very global world where everything is available with just a tap of a button. It really depends on the narrative that you choose to put this information across. And history in itself can be dark and bright. And so you just have to know how to create a balance. And also remember that if it's fiction you're writing, there still has to be an element of excitement. I'll go back to what Aisha said, that if you're writing for kids, no matter what, remember that you have to leave them with a sense of hope. So I think that's a good advice that you can pick from that. Slavery and slave trade is a big topic, but kids are exposed to it as young as possible. So I don't think that it's impossible. I think you can do it. Just find a good balance. There's a question here from Sylvia, and she's asking, now that both your books are out there, what's next for you? Any for you and for the books? Have adult readers completely lost you to the wonders of childhood and young adults? So this is for both Aisha and Nana Ekua.
I'm still gonna write for adult readers if you adult readers will have me. But I definitely, I think what I love is that we do have the freedom and the flexibility to kind of move between all of these different genres. Because as a writer, we're blessed to have the gift to write. And so whatever form that takes is just the form that takes. And sometimes the story or the work itself dictates that, it's better as a poem, or it's better as a short story, or it's better as, whatever, a children's book or a young adult. But I love the fact that I have the opportunity and the privilege and the freedom to explore all of these different genres.
Yeah, I agree. Same thing. I just go with the flow, and sometimes it's a nonfiction book that is an ending but has to be written. Sometimes it is this young adult book that writes itself in, less than a year. Sometimes it's this epic book that's developing your mind and hasn't written itself at all, but it hopes to come out soon. So it's the nature of the game and the beast. And for me, I just go wherever it feels like most exciting or feels almost suffocating, and you just have to let it out. Either because you're really, really excited, or in my case, sometimes it's just like the characters are like, let me out, and then I just have to heat it all. Yeah.
For someone who has written in a lot of genres, Aisha, I really would say that it's really admirable the way you're able to just switch and do it so masterfully. I think I've read almost all your books apart from ZAINAB Takes New York,
which is out next month. Yeah.
Okay. Can't wait for that.
Which is also so it's decided that they want it to be a 3-part book. So yeah.
So it's really nice to see how you're able to move from genre to genre. And I think it's in what you said, it's the freedom that you have to expand and do what feels right at the time. And for you, Nana Ekua, I really must say that I admire the way, I wasn't expecting this. When I got the book from Sylvia, I was like, when she said children, I was actually expecting young adults. And I was like, this is a real children's book that excites me with the illustrations and everything. So thank you for this book. And I have one last question for you, Nana Ekua, and then we can wrap up. The book comes with amazing illustration. So I really want to hear the relationship you had with working with the illustrator and, how that experience was for you.
Yeah, I just really want to shout out Daniel Minter. He is the illustrator of Blue. And the illustrations are just stunning. I did not realize, because it was my first children's book, that it's standard that you do not, as the author, work with or collaborate with the illustrator. The illustrator just goes off and interprets the words that you've given them. And so that was really, because I had been sitting with this book for a few years. So in my mind, I had such a very specific vision for the way it would look. So I was really, nervous about that. But I'm really glad that is the way it worked out, because first of all, just when I finally got to meet Daniel, and I met him after the book, after the book was had been printed. I met him virtually, actually. And when he started talking about his process for creating the illustrations, I was like tearing up, because it just felt almost like the wonder that I discovered about the color blue itself, that, it just, without me communicating so many different things, he actually was able to he was able to basically connect with the humanity of the story, and just put it together in a way that I think is so captivating, and really helps elevate this book to like a keepsake. I think about this book, and I feel like this is a book that is going to survive generations. This is a book that people are going to want to pass down, and it's partially because the illustrations are just like so beautiful. And one of the things when I do the classroom visits or the story times, they're always like, so okay, that's cool, but can you tell me about the pictures? And I'm always like, I'm sorry. I can't tell you. He has to tell you for himself. But yeah, I definitely, I'm so grateful that, I got blessed to have him be the person that, collaborated with me on this.
That's really, I never knew that writers don't communicate with the illustrators. And so I think that he did a beautiful job. The illustrations are so captivating and so well done. And I agree on the point you make about this book, lasting generations. Aisha, is it the same with picking a cover for your book?
Yes, same thing. The publishers will send the book out to illustrators who come up. Sometimes I've had a couple of different covers and then I got to pick, but most times it's just you okay the one cover they've chosen. I'm so lucky. I've loved almost all of the book covers. I think it was just in one instance that I fought for a different cover, but yeah, the illustrator just does the thing, and if you're lucky, it's a stunning job. So.
I just want to quickly say, Aisha, the cover of The Deep Blue Between is so beautiful, and I know it's come out in multiple
languages,
and also with the 100 Wells of Salaga.
Yeah,
just to see all of the different covers and realize in the different
pimples. Yeah,
so beautiful, so beautiful.
Yes,
I agree. I remember telling a friend that this is a cover that I could frame.
Exactly. And I had one book club actually make these tea towels. I never received it. I need to find where it is. I need that in my kitchen. So beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation and reading, and I want to say thank you to both Aisha and to Nana Ekua for your time. This has been so interesting. We've learned, we've been teenagers, we've been children, we've gone into a writing class, all in the space of about an hour and 5 minutes. And it's been a very interesting journey. I'm looking forward to seeing more interaction with the books and with its targeted audience. And yeah, as usual, we definitely can't wait to have you back in Ghana to do your rounds again and whenever you can. So thank you to everyone who signed up and showed up for this conversation. Thank you to Sylvia from Lotad. Thank you to Nana Ekua and Aisha for trusting me to moderate this session. It's been an honor. I've been fangirling the whole time, just trying to compose myself and talking to two amazing women and writers. And so I definitely hope that we'll be in conversation again in the near future and hearing about your new books. But until then, I entreat every one of us to grab copies of these two books and also other books by these writers. And follow them on their social media, follow Lotad for updates on other events. And so I'd like to say thank you and enjoy the rest of the day. It's evening for Ghana and Senegal. And I don't know what time of day it is in the US. And
still morning.
Okay, and you still have your food.
Enjoy the day.
So enjoy the day.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I just want to shout out my mom and my sister who were on here. Thank you for joining.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Liz.
You're most welcome.
Bye.